All right, welcome to another episode of the Credder Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Palmieri, and with me today is Logan Underwood. He's the CEO and co-founder at Ad Auris, spelled AD space AURIS. And he and his team are transforming the web into podcast-like audio, something that I've been waiting a long time to see a startup do. So, Logan, thanks so much for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. Very excited to have the conversation.
So let's start with the fact that you're a Canadian startup. We feature startups and products, and we cover the intersection of media and tech, and that plays out all over the world. And the Canadian startup ecosystem seems to be doing really well. Maybe it's number two behind the US in terms of total exits or investments or founders and startup creation. So if you could just kind of touch on what are some of the opportunities, but also maybe some of the challenges that are presented in being a Canadian startup.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a topic very close to my heart. I originally born and raised in the US and moved to Canada later on in the university days. So definitely have a good perspective on both sides. But as it pertains to the startup ecosystem, um, have to say that Canada definitely is in the midst of a moment where they're really putting a lot of effort and energy both on kind of the federal, provincial level, and as well as just the ecosystems and the entrepreneurs that are coming out of great Canadian companies like Shopify, like so many out in the East in Toronto, as well as the ecosystem that's really bubbling up in the West in Vancouver. Like those. And so what you see really is on the positive side, really, there are a couple really stalwart programs that Canada has seen emerge. We like to call them, the Canadian equivalents to 500 startups or the YCs of the US. But you have the Creative Destruction Lab, founded by Ajay Agrawal out of the University of Toronto. They are focused on helping deep tech companies, and well, that's where they started, but they've emerged to really help and address a sector agnostic approach. But they help startups bridge kind of the gap from research to commercialization, have started to bring in investors from the US to build out that support ecosystem. You have programs like the Next Canada that are focused on the training of entrepreneurs and just trying to push the youth to consider entrepreneurship as a viable alternative to more traditional career paths. But what really resonated, myself, I'm a graduate of the Next 36 program, great program out there in Toronto. Their perspective is, you go onto a Canadian campus today and you ask the top graduates, what do you aspire to? What do you want to do with, after you graduate? And they will respond inevitably, I want to go and run the robotics arm at Google. I want to do this at Facebook. I want to do this at Twitter. And you go to the great universities and campuses in the US and you ask the same of those folks over there, and they're going to say, I want to build the next Google. I want to build the next Tesla. And so there's this aspirational gap that Canada, I think, is, and the ecosystem is really trying to solve. They're trying to push entrepreneurs and people to recognize that, we can do it just as easily here. So it's nascent, but it's great. And so it's a fantastic time to be an entrepreneur in Canada. I think you just have everyone so motivated and so dedicated to trying to build up the ecosystem, both in the East, but also in Vancouver. You have programs like League of Innovators, founded by Ryan Holmes of Hootsuite, which is one of the big companies here in Canada, that are doing a great job at that. The challenges definitely are in particular when it comes to the fundraising. There's no shortage of great talent, great innovation happening here, but I think Canada tends to be a little bit more risk averse than the Wild West of the US, even though they're down south. And so to that end, I think any startup fundraising, Canadian investors want more traditional, I think, due diligence that you would find more in established companies rather than at that early stage of angels and pre-seeds. So they're looking at like, what are your financial models? What are your 3-year forecasts? You get those types of questions. And that can be difficult for early entrepreneurs who, first and foremost, you're focused on trying to create something that people love, solve a really pressing pain point, and you're not necessarily going to be focused on having some of that infrastructure that comes later down the line. So there's a little bit of a gap between that expectation in Canada, and so a lot of companies do go down to the US to run fundraisers and try and bring in that support. But I would say one of the best reasons to be in Canada too is the Canadian government is really, really created a tax environment that's so helpful. So they will pay you back 60% of your engineering salaries. They will give that money spent back to you. So you are effectively being paid by the government to go out there and innovate. And so that is just a fantastic program. And it's really helped, extend run rates. And in environments like that, helps us keep going and keep innovating. So lots of good reasons to be in Canada. I'm super happy to have the team and everyone here.
That's a really important kind of subsidy program, and I know that Canada is doing a lot of these kind of entrepreneur founder friendly subsidy programs. I think another advantage that I've heard from other founders is that the socialized healthcare aspect means that, you have employees who are willing to come work for a startup that maybe that startup A doesn't have to pay for these kind of healthcare benefits, but also if they can't afford the healthcare benefits, the employee doesn't feel like they're taking some kind of a life-threatening or risk maybe for their entire family's health by working at a startup because they know that their baseline needs are going to be met. I think that's really important. I definitely believe that American investors have gotten really familiar with investing in Canadian startups, and I definitely have seen a lot of founders come and do the U.S. tour, fly out to Palo Alto for a month or two and shop around and to much success. So that's great. I want to double click on the kind of risk adverse kind of profile that you mentioned. And I'm wondering if that same risk adverse profile for the Canadian investor is what's holding back the Canadian entrepreneur from thinking that they could be the founder of the next Google. If you had to kind of try to explain what it is that makes a Canadian founder not as willing to jump to this kind of pie in the sky, idea, is it a sense of risk adverseness, or is it perhaps that American founders have a healthy to unhealthy level of naivete and cockiness and maybe arrogance that, also is somewhat needed to start a company? What do you think is underlying that issue?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think there are like it's one that so I spent some time during my university years over in France as well, and it's a similar conversation, albeit not the same, but similar kind of comparison point between the European ecosystem and what's going on over there. Great R&D and deep research and innovation, but not seeing the commercialization in the same ecosystem on the startup side that you do see in the success in the US. And I think there's definitely similarities even between, perhaps to a lesser extent, between Canada and the US. And I think it's hard to pinpoint, but I do believe that, a part of it is cultural. Like in Canada, there is just, I think, a bit of a uh, risk aversion. You do have, oftentimes the industries here are look to see things validated first before they adopt. So in our banking systems, like it's slower to innovate. There's a higher, I think, threshold for people here to be comfortable with trying new, and that is what I think in the US can be really good. And it also has, its downsides. It's in that, if something goes wrong, well, there's less kind of that protection in the US than in Canada. But overall, I would say that, I mean, it is just, I think, about setting the conversation on this is possible. For so long, the conversation around entrepreneurship has been around Silicon Valley. And what's been great with the pandemic and with just generally the opening up of what's possible in terms of where you start a company and fundraising remote all of the benefits that the shift, the digital shift that has occurred over the pandemic has brought around are among those benefiting, I think, the conversation and the narrative that you don't have to be in the Silicon Valley. You don't have to go to Stanford or an Ivy League in order to get a funded or start a funded startup. And I think with that, narrative shift, there's a bit of an awakening in Canada about, graduates and entrepreneurs are really waking up to like the idea that they can do it too. And I mean, there have been people really trying to foster that perspective for a long time. So, like I mentioned, the Next Canada program, but also universities like the University of Waterloo, they're the number one feeder into Silicon Valley, and it's because they have these programs like that are work co-op programs where you alternate education and working terms, so that by the time you're graduating, you're coming out with full experience. Heavy focus on STEM and engineering and entrepreneurship as a study. And so I think it's just like really, I think the tide's really shifting and you're just seeing this momentum build. But I think also is that Canada now has recognizable names of companies that we're proud to point to and say, look, Shopify, look Fair, look at these big companies that are coming out of Canada and really, having a presence on the global stage. So it's really encouraging. Like I think Toronto and Vancouver both had some of the fastest growth in terms of tech jobs created in the past couple of years. So you're definitely seeing that momentum there, and it's fantastic to be a part of it. I think more and more, you just have a community that's in the early days and really eager to help each other out. So
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think the biggest threat to, Silicon Valley or Palo Alto's, maybe not monopoly, maybe isn't the right word, but their stronghold over the founder ecosystem is Zoom. The fact that a lot of these VCs and investors used to only take in-person meetings, and now they basically only take Zoom calls. There goes the leverage that the local geography had here. Personally, I moved 35 minutes closer to San Francisco about 6 months before the pandemic hit, thinking, this is a smart move. But in the end, when it came time to even have meetings and I was settled into my new place, we were already, Zoom was the new norm. And I'd imagine that that's been very helpful for all the struggling founders who, unfairly had to get on a plane and try to come raise in Palo Alto. And you can do the same thing over the internet. So let's turn gears now. Let's go to the space that you're working in. Now, let's talk about podcasting first. I know technically you guys aren't podcast company, but there's podcasts like audio creation, and then you integrate with podcasts as, platforms where you can actually consume the content. But let's just talk about podcasting specifically. I think the rise of podcasting took a lot of people by surprise, because it feels like a less immersive medium than video or VR, AR, or any of the things that people and maybe mainstream pundits were assuming was going to be the next medium that was going to really, gain mass adoption. But podcasting, whether it be from the likes of Joe Rogan, who really helped popularize the medium, it's really taken off in a big way. So I'm curious, diagnose for us, what is it about podcasting that is so different, that is so unique, that it has had this incredible run?
yeah, no, there's a great question, and I think I mean, first off, it's great to see just how the ecosystem has evolved over the past couple of years. But I think when it comes to podcasting, like I kind of start to think of more of on the fundamentals, like with video, with these other formats, there's often a requisite for you to be fully engaged with that content. So you're watching, you can't do anything else. So there's only, if you think about an individual's day, there's a finite amount of time that you can allocate to just that thing. A common piece of feedback that we hear at Ad Auris is, something along the refrain of, I have 20 minutes to read, but 2 hours to listen. And I think that really captures a lot of like what has enabled podcasting to become such a dominant medium, is that first and foremost, you have the convenience of audio. You know, people used to listen to radio all the time, and in many parts of the world still do. And I think podcasting took that same, all of the benefits of audio, be it the convenience, the ability to multitask, the ability to maximize time that otherwise would kind of be unproductive time, because now you can listen as well as you can wash the dishes or walk the dog. There's so many more opportunities within an individual's day where audio can integrate seamlessly, easily, and really help them, maximize the benefit of their time. And so I think, that's a big part of it. But then within podcasts, you've also had just, it's, people love listening to conversations. There's a way that people communicate that's so much more natural when, you and I are having a conversation compared to something distilled into essay format. And those conversations don't necessarily need to be, seen in video. Although I know that trends are towards, people find it really engaging when they can watch people talk. And it's because, we pick up on so many other visual clues. But that convenience at the end of the day, I think, is so central. And that's part of the same insight that we've tried to unlock at Ad Auris. So, at Ad Auris, what we do is we help individuals, or make it possible for people to, simply by using a Chrome extension, and it's a single click, or copy and pasting a URL, they can turn any written article into audio. And that audio is then seamlessly synchronized with their favorite podcast players, so they can listen at their convenience. Where they already go to listen to podcasts, now they can listen to audio versions of all of exactly the things that they wanted to read. But what we found time and time again is it's the convenience. People would love to read, the 20 tabs that you have open in your desktop, but they don't have the time, or there's too much friction in order to do that on your mobile device while you're commuting. And so the ease and the greater degree of ease that podcasting enables, and audio generally enables, I think, is just a tremendous benefit. And yeah, so that's, I think, generally some of the insights into the podcast space. But you also have the power of personality being able to really come through, which is what you don't often have in the written format. And so it's about 5 years ago, all publications were doing this shift to digital, shift to video. You have BuzzFeed News, you had publications galore creating, firing their writing teams and becoming video studios. And you've seen that kind of fall away and crumble. And I think at the end of the day, like, what people really care about is the quality of information, and also, in how many ways that information fits well into their lives. And I think audio does that in a really wonderful way that doesn't necessarily require all of the work of video. And so lots more people like you and I can create podcasts, and without necessarily the whole team behind us creating a video based or video first piece of content.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I mean, the real nugget is what you said, which is you can, with podcasting, transform unproductive time into productive time. Like washing the dishes, walking the dog, working out. You can be learning a new language. You can be learning about a field of study you're interested in while lifting weights or while scrubbing dishes. I do think that there's a potential downside in humans thinking that all time is productive time now, or could be turned into productive time, because we're plugged in more than ever. And sometimes walking the dog or washing the dishes was like almost like a mandatory unplugging. But now people are like, okay, before I walk the dog, let me find my 20-minute whatever it is that I'm going to listen to, put my headphones in, and you kind of remain plugged in longer. But ultimately, I think the net benefit of productivity in the world and learning in the world is huge, especially for people who commute to work, 2 hours a day, something like that. That's a whole education you could get in a year. You could apply to another job a year later because of what you've learned just through audio. So focusing now a little bit more on Ad Auris's product, which just to reiterate for users, is not a podcasting platform so much as it is a way to generate from text to speech, to take an article and create it in kind of a very easy to use one-click form on your guys' platform, which I'm a big fan of. In basically one click, generate a audio version of that text, so that again, if you have three different news articles that are, you got tabs open and you know you're not going to get to them and now you got to go wash the dishes, boom, one, two, three, line them up, create the playlist, and now you're doing the dishes and you're getting the news. And this is really, really great for the reader, but I'm curious, wearing the shoes of the journalist and the publisher, why should a journalist and a publisher be excited or happy about the fact that now their readers can access their content and that information in audio form? Why is that beneficial to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. And actually, it's a conversation we've had a lot with publications. An interesting part of Ad Auris is that we first and foremost started as a platform for publications to help them, bring their written content into audio, so that audio can either live embedded right there on the article page. So you or I coming across the website, well, we can listen now to the article in addition, as we read along. That audio can also be distributed to podcasting platforms. So you or I, if we're not regularly consuming the Nevada Independent or Harvard Magazine, now we can, go and listen to them on those platforms where we already go to consume audio content. And so, what we found in terms of the value for publications is we realized that our interests were the same, that publications are creating tons of very quality, well-informed information. And you guys at Credder will know, like, there is a lot of quality content. As much as there is the other stuff, there's so much time and energy and love and interest invested into creating, that fourth estate, that informed public. And what we want to help publications do is simply make it possible so that their readership, their user base can get as much out of that work that the publication has done as possible. So a funny anecdote is the New York Times has for their journalists, they have an internal plugin that allows them to see, how far into the article do readers on average go. And the sad truth is that it's usually the first paragraph is 90% of them have
It's
dropped
not
off.
it's not
Like,
just the headline.
I mean, close to,
Yeah.
close to. And that's even with, all of the resources and all of the great reporting that the New York Times is known for. And the issue is there that, that information that is simply sitting there and has been created now is simply in a medium that isn't suited or matched to how people are increasingly choosing to consume information. And so that's our message to publications is, look, like, our job is to help you take the information you've already created, all of the work you've already done, and just have more value out of that,
Right.
unlock more value out of the articles you've already produced. And so that's what we've seen really resonate. And what's been great is we've seen, individuals really love the fact, be it, someone who has failing vision or someone with dyslexia or someone who simply is, after 12 hours of Zoom, too fatigued to really want to spend the 15 minutes to read, they have that option to listen. And that is the key, is that it is now an option for the publication's readership and user base to choose which medium best suits, their time of day, their moment. And so that's where I think ultimately, we win, is by giving the individual, the consumer, as much choice as possible. And by, making that written content into audio, we're doing that. We're empowering everyone to make that choice themselves, and people end up consuming a lot more. And so, that's been and it's been great. We started with just a handful of publications here in Canada, like the Conversation Canada, and a number of nonprofits around the U.S., like the Nevada Independent. And over the past little while, we've grown to a list of over 150 publications, like Harvard Magazine. You have the Walrus, which is like Canada's New Yorker, Dazine magazine out of in the UK. and hundreds others. So it's been fantastic, and I think the message is resonating.
It seems like a no-brainer for publishers to want to do this. Seems being kind of the hint at the next line of question. Uh, and we both deal with publishers a lot, and props to the publishers. They're the ones creating the content and doing the work and the journalism. And it seems like a great return on investment because they've already put in the input costs, right? They've already paid for the journalist's time and effort. They've already created the words and the content. And then here you come, as well as potential competitors that we'll get into later. But here you come, this text to speech allows them to take their existing cost and simply leverage it into more distribution, more ways for their end user to consume the content. So it seems like a no-brainer for publishers, but Ad Auris has kind of, I don't know, I don't want to put the word pivot in your mouth, but has kind of gone to charging the end user, the reader, for a premium version of the service because, well, let's face it, publishers aren't necessarily the ones holding the most money and making the most investments in technology. They're not usually the most on the cutting edge of the new emerging technologies. They tend to kind of have to be pushed a little bit into the next trend or the next medium. So tell me a little bit about how you think about going from trying to sell these publishers in the early days to now you're kind of more of a direct to consumer model with a premium version. And is it going to be the case that you're going to try to do both simultaneously and keep kind of a direct to publisher model going as well? How do you think about focus? How do you think about kind of the better use of your time?
Absolutely, and these are great questions, and I think they're ones that my co-founders and I, Tina Hartel and Varun Sharma, we tussle over every day. But yeah, like you said, during our time and experience working with publications, we realized that we just weren't moving fast enough. That we were, if we really wanted to get to that end destination of the web in audio, publications, while a critical partner, perhaps weren't the first stepping stone towards that ultimate vision. And what we kept hearing from listeners of the publications, and what was compelling for publications, is that their readers were saying, hey, I really like this. And the more that we dug in with the listeners themselves, what we were hearing is, they, for every article they read on the Nevada Independent or the Conversation Canada, they have 20 other tabs open of publications, niche content, newsletters, Substacks, all of that they also want that convenience of audio for. And so what we realized is, first and foremost, in order to be a successful audio product, we have to create the most like a very easy to use and listenable audio. And so the best way to kind of create the tightest feedback loop was by working directly with end listeners. So we took the same infrastructure and we said, okay, we're going to put it on, a front end that allows for you and I to simply copy and paste, turn an article into audio, and then listen to it wherever and however we want. And what we've learned through that, and what we've been able to rapidly iterate around, is developing a much richer and fuller audio experience. Because, say, for every article that's input into our system, it becomes a mini experiment for us. So we can start to change the narrator voice, or start to input musical intonations in the background, layer in additional production layers to try and understand, hey, how can you create the best audio experience possible? And that type of rapid iteration isn't something that is possible when you're working with publications, because, and to their own right, they'll have parameters and specifications for how they want their audio to sound. And that is by no means wrong. But for us as a startup trying to understand how can we create the infrastructure by which the web is turned into audio, we need a faster iteration loop. And so that was really what we started out with, by offering the same service to individuals directly. And what we saw was, we had a couple of really fortuitous moments where we went viral on Reddit, and there's a subreddit called The Internet is Beautiful, and we had thousands of people just interacting and finding us, and really sharing a lot of love. And what we found is there are so many more use cases than we initially envision, from accessibility to learning languages to teachers. The demand and the need for having the convenience of being able to listen to what previously you could only read, that's a universal. And so our challenge and what we've been working on over the last 6 months is, okay, if we're if there's this use case across so many different segments of the population, so many different verticals, how do we need to make sure we're narrowing in and starting with the segment that's really going to be receptive, really going to share that feedback so that we can begin to build a product that's just not just good, but absolutely fantastic. And so that's the progress and the journey that we've been on. What we realized was, to be successful for publications, people have to be listening to the audio. In order to have something that people listen to, we need to understand better than anyone else what makes something listenable and how can we make it, that audio version of the written content, the most listenable. And that's what we really use as our guiding light in focusing first and foremost on the end listener over the last couple of months. And we believe very much that as we get better and better at this audio generation side, what's going to follow is that we can offer not only a better product to individuals, but also the best product for publications. We can take the insights from the end listeners and transform them into insights that craft our business to business product, and our integrations for publications. And so that's part of what really where we see ourselves is, we started out with our focus being on the publication side, took a lot of fantastic learnings there and said, okay, you know what, we're going to put a pin on that. This is where we really are going to drive the most learnings, working hand in hand with individuals. And that's where we've been focusing our time and energy on. And, I think eventually we'll be back working with publications again in full force. We're still, having interactions and bringing them on board. But in terms of that prioritization you focus, we realized we need to be super close to the people actually consuming the content day to day, understanding, why, or, is it the convenience of where they listen? If they can listen to something in Spotify where they already are going, does that mean that they're willing to sacrifice a little bit of the quality if they have that convenience of location? Is it that for certain types of content, because God forbid, synthetic speech is not meant for every piece of written form content out there today. It's not going to give you the best poetry reading. It's not going to give you, the heartfelt emotion and resonance that you're going to get from a human narrator, for a lot of different content types. But it's really good for a certain type of written material, for information first. Like, there's no better way to get that. And so that's what we've been, learning and crafting and building our product around, are insights like those.
You just gave me an interesting idea, and we've talked in a previous call about a bunch of different crazy ideas of how to make the audio experience better, like having a Morgan Freeman sounding, option and things like that. But you just mentioned kind of the tonality and kind of how a poetry reading would be a little bit different, and maybe the typical text-to-speech automated voice doesn't quite get that kind of nuance and beauty across. I've actually, just to kind of go the other direction, I've had audiobooks where they tried, the person reading the audiobook was overly aggressive in this way, where they were trying to make every word sound like it was the most meaningful word ever. And so I wonder if there would be a way for Ad Auris to have like a, different parameters where you can tone down or tone up in the future, and, have a little bit more of just like a direct, objective sounding speech, and a little bit more playful, or anyway, there some good offerings that you guys can dive into there. You mentioned how, earlier in the conversation about how Canadian investors are very pragmatic and they want to see the revenue model, maybe even earlier than, a typical angel investor in the United States might want to see revenue or see that you have a plan to get to revenue. And so I'm curious, obviously going direct to consumer has its pros and cons. You get, your customer is the person you're trying to please with the end product, but it also takes a lot of end consumers to really have a revenue model that gets those investors that, put their trust in and money to you, to make them happy and to make sure that they see a path to a good outcome as well. So I'm curious if you could, with a magic wand, get one platform, because the way I see this, and we've talked about this before, is there's three different players in this space. There's the reader, the end consumer, there's the publisher that's creating the content, and then there's the platform which features kind of agnostically content from a lot of different publishers and kind of serves as the middleman between the publishers and the end consumer. So if there was a single platform, whether it be a web browser or a major news aggregator or Spotify, if you could have one integration with the wave of your magic wand, who would that player be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And my mind immediately goes to, where do people look for news today? And where would it be most well aligned in, providing to the end listener a better and more seamless way of experiencing or listening to that news, bringing all of the benefits that we've learned from our user base and incorporating it into a larger platform. So I would think, you know, like the Feedlys and the Pockets of the world, the Instapapers of the world, those would be just the most magical, I think, pairings, simply because that's what people use to sort and filter through all of that information that is out there. And for us to be able to then incorporate our audio offering into that, I think is then you're getting close to that perfect experience for then the listener. So
Okay.
yeah, that would be my initial answer.
Okay, so let me maybe ask a slightly trickier question here. Let's say Edwin, who I know, the CEO of Feedly, let's say he, heard this podcast and said, "All right, Ad Auris, oh, you're gonna have narration for all of our content in one click. Let's do it." Is Ad Auris ready to be able to, make an at scale integration like that? And obviously you don't have to be, and you could work to it, but do you think Adoris is ready to integrate with such a large third-party platform?
I would tentatively say yes, simply because we started out in the publication space. And so we've been, when we work with a publication, we synchronize with their content backend, their RSS feed. And what we do is we start creating audio of every single piece of content. And so when you have 150 publications going and we're creating content and audio for all of them every single day, we are creating we're hitting scale in terms of that audio generation and audio serving. So I would be, Feedly is a bit bigger of a step up, but I think, we're on our way in terms of having that infrastructure in place. So I would say let's start the conversation now, and in a couple of weeks, I'm sure our team can be in tip top form for a pilot.
Yeah, nothing like that to motivate. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk a little
Absolutely.
bit about competition in the space because Autumn, I think, would probably AUDM. I know you're aware of it, and probably it's the most recognizable player in the space for our listeners. How are you different than Autumn, and what is kind of the competitive landscape that you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. So first answering around Autumn. So Autumn is, yeah, for those people who don't know, they're a fantastic service. They got started a number of years back, and what they do is they match, some of the best narrators, audiobook or otherwise, with like feature length pieces from top tier publications. So be it New York Times or the New Yorker, they'll narrate those pieces. And actually, it was so great that the New York Times even bought them 2 years ago. So now they're a part of the New York Times, which has been fantastic. And I think honestly, that was an early part of the validation for us in that people will listen. The first question was, will people listen to content they can otherwise read? And that was an excellent proof point to saying yes. But the problem there was that we then looked and said, okay, when you expand the vision a little bit and look at all of the content that is generated on the internet every day from all of the Substacks, all of the WordPress blogs, there is so much more than can be feasibly narrated by those top tier narrators each and every day. Even if they are narrating 20 and recording 24/7, you're going to scale linearly. But the internet is so much larger than that, and that's part of what we wanted to service. There are so many fantastic niches of content and communities and newsletters and everything out there that's being generated, and we wanted to become the layer by which all of that can bring that same audio accessibility that Autumn provides for those top features. We want to be able to provide the same experience for the rest of the internet. And so that's where the second question really was, what type of quality of audio do we need to hit for people to be willing to listen? What's good enough to get started? And so that's where that is really one of the core hypotheses that Ad Auris has been built around, is that we're approaching an inflection point of synthesized speech, of text to speech, that is going to, in the next couple of years, at least for the majority of the content that's out there, reach a level that's good enough where people will make that substitution. So I think we're playing a little bit of the longer game by deciding to stake our flag on the synthetic speech side. But I think the advantages there are that we can service, we can create thousands of audio narrations a day and hundreds of hours, whereas Autumn is going to be restricted by a number of hours or however many narrators they're employing. And I think fundamentally they're complementary to each other. Like, you should always, like, there will be nothing that can substitute the finest delivery of these very talented individuals, and these pieces deserve that. But for everything else, there should still be audio. It's still an issue of accessibility. For everyone out there who has low vision or is vision impaired or dyslexic or screen fatigue, it shouldn't be that they don't have an option. And that's where, that's what we want to build. And so I think we're kind of a part of the ecosystem that's going to help, just create a better experience overall. But in terms of the broader competitive landscape, I think more and more there are companies and startups poking their head into space and recognizing, and I think thinking about the same things we are. And at the end of the day, what really kind of we look back to as our core principles are, well, first, in these early stages, it's all about creating something that the individual is going to love. So we spend a little bit of time thinking about the competitors, but first and foremost, it's talking with individuals, trying to figure out the convenience, the quality, how can we improve? But then second is, by actually having this unique stance of bridging both publication partnerships, but also the end listener, there's a little bit of a fortuitous feedback loop there where, as more individuals come onto our platform, we have a larger audience by which we can help publications get their audience in front of. We can help then also bring those insights of how are they listening, what are they listening to, those insights, and share them with publications. And publications, by creating partnerships, their content is ready-made in audio. They can have a more prestigious, a more quality-made audio that is readily available for them and the listeners to engage with. And so I think, where we see ultimately ourselves really being able to plant a good moat around it is that two-sided marketplace. And we have, at the end of the day, our sights set on the web and audio. And in part, what that means for us is, can we create the infrastructure by which, any written piece of content has the best, most well-produced audio to accompany it? And I think the only way you're going to get there is by being able to look at what everyone is listening to, experiment, and begin to not just do a voiceover, a single voiceover, but begin to fill out that entire audio production stack. So from, where do you put in the sound effects, the digital, the musical scoring, how do you change the syntax so that instead of just being a static reading of the article, it's becoming something as engaging or closer to as engaging as, this conversation. The way that you and I are speaking is very different than how someone would write this similar topic or similar information. And that kind of transformation is we can begin to understand, hey, how can we start to actually, you know, start with an article, end up with a, the best audio experience, and understanding the inputs and how we as a company can shape that. That's what gets me so excited. And so I think, today there's some similarities, but we're increasingly setting out divergent paths. And I happen to think that the way we're doing it is a pretty good way.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Were you surprised how much of the problem you solved for the visually impaired community? Because my understanding is that you really sought out to kind of solve this problem out of personal frustration, which is just basically the concept similar to what I had with Credder, which is just something like this should exist. The fact that it doesn't is crazy. Let's go do it. But I don't believe you sought out to like really solve this problem for the visually impaired community. Were you surprised how big that community is? What has the reception been like from them?
Yeah, so actually, some of the first, publications that we brought on were focused on the differently abled and accessibility based audience. And so, what we found and what really has resonated for me, we had a conversation with someone who his response was, to our kind of surprise that we were seeing this salience, was accessibility and accessible design is good design. The more accessible that something is, be it offering an audio and written format for anything, that simply is just a better experience. You don't So when you think about creating a product that is the best experience, oftentimes that leads you down a path of creating a more accessible product. And that ever since has been really resonant. And I think there can be a risk of getting siloed. Of you think, oh, I'm an accessibility tool. No, I'm just you can just be a good tool, a good service, a good platform, and by being accessible, be an even better one. And I think so for us, what that has meant is what we found is some of the first audio solutions, audio versions of written work out there were built for accessibility first in mind. But what we realized is that the innovation around the audio experience really stopped at really the lowest kind of common denominator, which was, can I listen to what's on page? And we wanted to really focus on creating not only just like the audio version, but a listenable, enjoying, engaging audio version of what is on page. And so a lot of the feedback has been, they'll be listening rather using our audio rather than these alternative solutions. And I, there's a long way for us to go. There's a lot of, criteria and infrastructure you have to have in place to be, very substitutable with the screen readers and pure accessibility plays. And we're not that yet. That's part of our product roadmap. But I think the feedback that we've heard is, for even, I mean, those with dyslexia, like that's not going to be something that you necessarily have a screen reader for. But by normalizing the possibility of having audio and audio versions of what else is written out there, I think that's a huge step forward. And that's hopefully one that the community has gotten behind so far, and we continue to try and work with them to build a better experience. So
Okay.
yeah.
And you're obviously a pretty heavy user of your own product, as any CEO should be, to really understand it. And if you've, especially if you created it out of personal frustration and the tool solves that problem, you're going to be a heavy user. So this isn't quite a product roadmap question, because sometimes as the CEO, we want the product to be able to do something that maybe isn't even really technically possible or won't be possible until you have X, Y, or Z lined up first too. So maybe this isn't in your product roadmap yet, but what is something that you yourself wish the product could do today? And if you could wave a magic wand again, boom, Ad Auris, the product would be able to do this.
Yeah, so I think I may have hinted at it a little bit. ago. But where if I could wave a magic wand, I think instead of listening to a static like a narration that's precisely word for word of the article on page, if I can wave a wand and have an audio version that's more like a conversation between you and I, where it's the same information, but the way that the audio is it's perhaps two people speaking back and forth, explaining question response, the information that's there, if it's enriched with really effectively, you look at the podcasting landscape and you look at Serial and you look at like some of those classics of podcasts and you look at Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman, like they have so many people behind the scenes doing everything from the musical scoring, the sound design, all of that, creating these like fantastic, engaging listening experiences. I want to get as close as that possible. So it's about the information at the end of the day. And if I could wave a wand and for every article suddenly have this engrossing audio experience, oh my gosh, that's the dream. And
Yeah.
that's what we're building toward. And like you said, there's lots of things that need to kind of fall into place before that happens. But oh my god, that's yeah,
So
that's the vision.
we're talking about sound effects too. So like if you read the word, you don't read the word, but text to speech, if the reader says the word explosion, theoretically there might be a in the background, something like that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason why it can't be that engrossing. Honestly, the reason so many, and it needs to be well done. Like it can't be, your fourth grade like iMovie project of special effects and explosions, and you lose sense of the plot or what's going on. Like it needs to be done artfully. But I don't think that everyone has grasped just how early days this whole kind of opportunity of synthetically generated generative AI, but in the audio space. Like I just think that there's so much more that we can push the envelope, and I want to be the company that does that. And I think part of that is the texture of the audio, but also think of how many if you have 15 articles and there's similarities or they're discussing different points of view, could you have an audio version that begins to incorporate or take pieces of those and create a single audio to listen to? There's going to be humans involved in that process for a long time, but I think in terms of a North Star to set, like being able to think about fundamentally taking away the barriers of medium to consuming information. The easier that individuals can consume information however and whenever they would like, that's a win in my book. And I think audio provides just so much convenience that has been untapped, and not only convenience, but we can build great experiences on top of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, a bit of a long-winded, but
No.
yeah, that's where I like to dwell. That's where I like to, that's where my head goes into the clouds.
Your head is in the right place, and it shows in what is really a beautiful product that I hope all of our listeners go and check out, and will definitely be in the show notes. And are there any other places you'd like to send listeners in the show notes before we get to the last two questions? Any Twitter handles or URLs that you want to send people to?
Yeah, so I mean, adauris.com, or our user facing platform is called play.adauris.com. So definitely, check it out, send us feedback. We're always responding and working with users. And I think generally, other than that, go and follow the publications that are worthwhile and meaningful and putting good information out there and support them. And, hopefully before long, they'll have audio options provided by us and go from there. And that's honestly one of the biggest, biggest pleasures have been when we've had people who have discovered us and then messaged or emailed publications they care about saying, you need this as part of your platform. And that has been one of the most rewarding things. So if there's a publication you're passionate about and you don't get to read as much as you would like, well, then let us know, let them know that there's an option for creating audio versions. So
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe not a bad idea on your website somewhere to just have a little area that says, "Do you want to help us grow? Here's a template. Send it to your favorite publisher, and tell them to get in touch with us because they're missing out." All right, so last two questions for you here, Logan. Totally out of left field. You've heard some of the podcasts, but I don't think you quite got to the end. So hopefully these will still be new for you. So the first question is Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin?
Oh boy. I did see. Okay, yeah, was not prepared for that. I did see a headline actually today saying it has been on a bit of a winning streak in the last little while. So things are potentially bullish. I mean, you have a lot of economic turbulence, so maybe people are taking a second look at digital currency. So I think generally bullish, just because you had a bit of a shocker, but now you're seeing probably people go out of these alternative coins into kind of the staple, the true decentralized token, and that's going to be the winner over the long term. But yeah, that's
That sounds pretty
I don't have many
bullish.
myself, so yeah,
That's that does sound
I'll
pretty
let you know
bullish
when I
then.
have skin in the game. I'll follow up. So
Okay.
don't make any purchases yet on my advice.
Okay. Yeah, not financial advice ever. All right, last question for you here, Logan, and then we'll let you go. Are we living in a simulation?
Ooh, as someone who works in generative audio, generative media, I would have to say we're still a very long way from getting anything close to those perfect experiences. So if that's any signal, I would have to say probably not. I wish I had a more philosophical bend on that, but just based off of what I've seen and heard in my day to day, I don't think I'm seeing any kind of signal that the technology exists out there yet. So um, that's my approach, and so I would say, fortunately, or depending on your perspective, I think it's flesh and blood here on planet
Uh,
Earth.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Logan. This was great. And everything that Logan mentioned will be in the show notes. Please go check out Ad Auris. I'll be listening to my narrated articles. And yeah, best of luck to you and the team. And the door is always open if you guys have some new products to promote. I know you recently did some cool things with Chat GPT. We didn't quite have time to get to it today, so maybe as you guys go deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole, we'll have you back on to discuss because generative AI is here to stay, and you guys have your foot pretty solidly in the door. And just again, props to what you guys are doing, and congrats to you and the team.
Thanks again. This has been a great conversation, and really looking forward to hopefully, collaborating in the near
Yeah,
future. So that's when we'll have to get another podcast up once we
let,
have that, make that happen.
let's do it. All right. Thank you, Logan. Take care.
All right. Thanks so much. Cheers.